They seemed invincible, didn't they? Untouchable. The kind of person who walked into rooms and rearranged them without trying. The kind of person who always had an answer, always had the upper hand, always found a way to turn every situation back in their favor. You spent years watching them operate and wondering, privately, in your quietest moments, if they would ever face a consequence. If anything could ever actually reach them. Here is your answer. Leaving. Completely. That's what reaches them. Not the arguments you had. Not the tears. Not the ultimatums that dissolved the moment they turned the charm back on. Not the confrontations you rehearsed and delivered and watched slide off them like water. None of that penetrated. But your absence? Your clean, total, sustained absence? That goes somewhere nothing else ever reached. Somewhere underneath the performance. Somewhere they cannot protect. The word die in the title is not meant literally. Let's be clear about that from the start. What dies is something psychological, something that was always fragile beneath the surface of strength, always dependent, always secretly maintained by your presence in their life. What dies is the constructed self, the performed invincibility, the carefully managed image of someone who needs nothing and no one. Without you in the audience, that performance has nowhere to land. And a performance with no audience does not survive. This is the paradox at the heart of every narcissist's power. The very strength they project, the dominance, the certainty, the imperviousness, is entirely dependent on having someone to project it toward. Their power is not self-generated. It is reflected. You are the mirror. And the moment the mirror is removed, not cracked, not argued with, not held up defiantly, but simply taken away, the reflection disappears. And without the reflection, the thing being reflected becomes uncertain of its own existence. Think about how they behaved when you were present. Every room they entered, every conversation they dominated, every moment of cruelty or charm, all of it was performed with an awareness of your response. They watched you even when they pretended not to. Your flinch, your admiration, your confusion, your hurt. These were the instruments they played to confirm their own significance. You were not just a person to them. You were the ongoing proof that they mattered. And proof, once removed, leaves a silence that is louder than any argument. The story I'm telling you today is not about revenge. Not about satisfaction at someone else's suffering. It is about understanding. The kind of understanding that finally makes the last few years of your life make sense. Because if you've been in a relationship with a narcissist, you've probably wondered, more than once, why they worked so hard to keep you. Why the pursuit was so relentless when you tried to leave. Why someone who seemed to value you so little fought so hard to keep you close. This is why. You were not just a person they loved, or failed to love, or loved badly. You were infrastructure. Psychological infrastructure that the entire operation of their identity was built upon. Without you, the building doesn't just feel empty. It loses structural integrity. The walls that seemed so solid reveal themselves to be facades. The confidence that seemed so innate turns out to have been borrowed. Borrowed from your reactions, your presence, your continued willingness to be there. And when the borrowing stops, the debt comes due. Some of you are watching this while still in contact, still answering messages, still explaining yourself, still hoping that this time the conversation will go differently. And some of you have already made the break and are in the strange, disorienting territory of no contact, where you feel both free and terrified, both certain and riddled with doubt. Wherever you are, this video is for you. Because what you're about to understand will change the way you see their strength. And more importantly, it will change the way you see your own. The narcissist's collapse under no contact is not always visible. They are expert at concealment, expert at constructing alternative narratives, finding new supply, performing invulnerability for every available audience. But beneath the performance, in the private hours, in the internal landscape they have always fled rather than inhabited, something real is happening. Something that their strength, their tactics, their entire lifetime of psychological defense cannot prevent. The encounter with themselves. With what remains when you are no longer there. Stay with me for this. Because we are going to walk through exactly what that collapse looks like. Inside their mind, in their behavior, in the long aftermath of losing the one person whose presence made the whole performance feel worth giving. And when you understand it fully, you will never again mistake their strength for something independent of you. Their strength was always, in part, yours. And you are taking it back. The first thing to understand is the difference between genuine strength and performed strength. Genuine strength is self-generated. It exists in the absence of an audience. It doesn't require confirmation, doesn't need to be witnessed, doesn't depend on someone else's reaction to remain intact. The narcissist's strength is the other kind. It is performed strength, real in its effects, convincing in its presentation, but fundamentally dependent on the presence of someone receiving the performance. Take away the receiver, and the signal has nowhere to go. Narcissistic identity is what psychologists call an externally regulated self. This means the narcissist's sense of who they are, their confidence, their sense of worth, their emotional stability, is maintained not from within but from without. Every admiring glance, every fearful response, every sign of dependence from the people around them is a regulation mechanism. It keeps the internal world from doing what it would otherwise do, collapse into the anxiety and emptiness that lives beneath the grandiosity. This is the secret the narcissist's presentation is designed to hide. Not from you, from themselves. The grandiosity, the superiority, the imperviousness, these are not character traits. They are defenses. Constructed, usually in childhood, in response to an internal experience so painful, so empty, so devoid of stable love that the psyche built an alternative architecture entirely. A self that would never need to feel that emptiness again. A self that would extract from the external world everything the internal world could not provide. And for decades it worked. Because there were always people willing to provide what was extracted. People like you, empathetic, patient, committed to seeing the good, willing to absorb the bad, capable of a depth of love that the narcissist could never quite reciprocate but always, always needed. You kept the system running. Not because you were naive, because you were genuinely loving. And genuine love, directed at a person who uses it as fuel, keeps a very particular kind of engine running almost indefinitely. Until the fuel stops. Until you stop. And here is what happens when the fuel stops arriving, when no contact is real and sustained and the narcissist finally has to accept that the supply line has been cut. The external regulation system fails. Not all at once, in stages. First, the frantic searching for replacement fuel. Then the escalating tactics to retrieve the original source. Then, when those fail, something quieter and more fundamental. The beginning of a confrontation with the self they spent a lifetime constructing defenses against. The narcissist's strength, the thing that made them seem untouchable, was always load-bearing. It was carrying something. It was holding the emptiness at bay. And the thing that kept it strong enough to carry that weight was supply. Consistent, renewable, abundant supply. When supply is withdrawn, the strength doesn't maintain itself. It begins the slow, agonizing process of revealing what it was always concealing. And what it was concealing is not something the narcissist has the internal resources to face alone. Think of it this way. The narcissist is like a city powered entirely by a single external generator. As long as the generator runs, the city is lit, functional, impressive, gleaming at night, humming with activity. Turn off the generator, and the city goes dark. Not because the buildings weren't real. Not because the streets weren't real. But because nothing in the city had its own power source. Everything, every light, every function, every sign of life, was borrowed from outside. Your no contact is turning off the generator. What makes no contact specifically so devastating, more than any other response you could have given, is its completeness. Arguments gave them something to respond to. Anger gave them something to reframe. Even your hurt gave them something to feel superior about. But silence gives them nothing. Nothing to argue with, nothing to manage, nothing to spin. The silence just sits there. Unanswerable. Undeniable. The most complete form of withdrawal one person can give another. And the narcissist, who has an answer for everything, has no answer for this. The psychological deterioration that follows sustained no contact is documented and real. Therapists who work with narcissists, the rare ones who actually show up for treatment, usually in crisis, describe a pattern. The loss of a primary supply source triggers what looks, from the outside, like grief. But it isn't grief in the healthy sense. It's a supply crisis presenting as grief. It doesn't process the way real grief does. It doesn't move through stages toward acceptance. It circles. It rages. It seeks. It cannot land because it has nowhere to land. And beneath the circling, beneath the rage and the seeking, something is eroding. The confidence that was always performed is performing less convincingly now, not to others necessarily, but to themselves. The internal voice that always had a justification, always had a reframe, always had a way to make the narcissist the hero or the victim but never the accountable party, that voice is quieter. Not gone, but quieter. And in the space the quieter voice leaves, something terrifying begins to surface. The truth of who they actually are, alone, without anyone to tell them otherwise. The shift happens gradually and then suddenly, like most things that matter. For weeks, the narcissist is managing. New supply has been found, or old supply has been reactivated, and the performance continues. They look fine to the outside world. They may even look better than fine. Busy, social, visibly unbothered. But something underneath the management is different. Something in the quality of the performance has changed. It's working harder now. You can feel it even from a distance, if you're paying attention. Because performing for new supply is not the same as having you. You knew them. That's the part that makes you irreplaceable in a way no new person can immediately replicate. The new audience doesn't know the history, doesn't know the mythology, doesn't know what they sacrificed or survived or built or destroyed. You knew all of it. And performing for someone who knows the full story is categorically different from performing for a clean slate. You were a witness. And witnesses cannot be replaced by new audiences. Then something happens, and it's different for every person, but something always happens, that cracks the management. A moment when the new supply says something that reminds them of you. A place they visit that you both loved. A song, a smell, a particular quality of light on a winter afternoon. Something small and completely undefendable breaches the architecture. And in that moment, the narcissist doesn't feel superiority or anger or the usual arsenal of self-protective emotion. They feel something raw. Something they don't have a name for. Loss. Real loss. Not the strategic loss of a supply source, though that's present too. But something beneath it. The loss of a person who was genuinely woven into the fabric of their daily existence. The loss of someone who knew them, imperfectly, painfully, through all the distortions of the relationship, but knew them. And there is something in being known, even badly, that the narcissist was secretly dependent on in ways their psychology never allowed them to consciously acknowledge. Until now. This is the plot twist that no one prepares you for. The narcissist, at the moment of genuine loss, often becomes briefly, unexpectedly human. Not safe, let's be absolutely clear about that. Not changed. Not suddenly capable of the relationship you needed them to be capable of. But momentarily, genuinely human. The defense is thin enough that something real surfaces. And what surfaces is not pretty. It is not the remorse of a person who has done the work. It is the grief of a person who has just realized what they destroyed, without understanding why they destroyed it. The texts that come in this phase are different from the earlier ones. Earlier, the messages were strategic, warmth, then guilt, then threat, cycling through the toolkit. These messages are different. They arrive at odd hours. They're less polished. They say things the narcissist would never have said when they were fully armored. I don't know who I am without you. I keep reaching for the phone to call you and remembering I can't. I've never felt this before and I don't know what to do with it. These messages are real. And they are not enough. This is the most dangerous moment in no contact. When the messages become real. When the pain on the other end is genuine enough that your empathy, enormous, well-trained, reflexively responsive to suffering, rises up and wants to answer. This is the moment most people break. Not because they've forgotten what happened, but because they were never cruel people. And watching someone suffer, even someone who hurt them, is not something they can observe with total detachment. But here's what you have to hold on to in that moment. Genuine pain does not equal genuine change. The narcissist is not in pain because they understand what they did to you. They are in pain because you are gone. Those are entirely different things. One is accountability. The other is loss. A person in pain from loss will do anything to end the pain, including temporarily becoming whoever they need to be to get you back. And once the pain ends, once you return, the reason for the performance disappears. And so does the performance. The turning point in your own story comes when you can hold their genuine pain and still choose yourself. When you can say, quietly, internally, without cruelty, I see that you're hurting, and I'm not going back. That capacity to hold compassion and boundaries simultaneously is not something you could have had at the beginning of this. It is something the relationship, as brutal as it was, built in you through years of having to learn the hard way where care ends and self-destruction begins. You paid for that wisdom. It's yours now. And on their side of the silence, something irreversible is happening. The invincible person, the one who walked into rooms and rearranged them, the one who always had the upper hand, the one you wondered if anything could ever reach, is being reached. Not by your anger, not by your confrontation, not by anything you did or said in all the years you tried to be heard. By your absence. By the simple, devastating fact that you are gone and you are staying gone. And nothing in their arsenal was designed for this. The collapse of a narcissist under no contact does not always look like what you'd expect. It rarely looks like obvious breakdown. What it looks like, from the fragments that reach you through mutual contacts, through social media, through the occasional unguarded message, is acceleration. More activity, more noise, more performance. As if by increasing the volume of their visible life they can drown out what's happening in the invisible one. But the acceleration itself is the tell. Stillness is sustainable. Frantic is not. Their relationships begin to suffer in ways that weren't visible when you were there to stabilize the system. The new supply, who entered during the idealization phase, starts encountering what you encountered, the subtle dismissal, the shifting of blame, the emotional unavailability that hides behind charm. History beginning to repeat. And the narcissist, who always managed to keep multiple plates spinning through sheer force of personality, starts dropping plates in ways they can't quite explain. Because the person who steadied them is gone. And they never learned to steady themselves. Professionally, there are sometimes cracks. The performance at work, the confident, capable, impressive presentation of self that had always come naturally, requires more effort. The interior noise has grown loud enough to affect the exterior performance. Colleagues notice something off. Not dramatic, not crisis level, just different. A flatness under the charm. A distraction that wasn't there before. A person going through the motions of their own persona in a way that wasn't apparent when the persona felt effortless. And in their private hours, the ones no one sees, the ones no amount of social activity can fill completely, the consequences are most acute. There is a specific kind of silence that descends on a person who has spent decades running from themselves and finds, one evening, that they have finally run out of places to go. It is not peaceful silence. It is the silence of a room with no furniture. Nothing comfortable to sit on. Nothing familiar to rest against. Just space, and whatever lives in the space, unmediated, unmanaged, finally unavoidable. This is where the narcissist meets the self they built their entire life to avoid. The original wound, the early emptiness, the unmet need, the place where love should have been and wasn't, surfaces not as memory but as feeling. As a texture of existence that the entire elaborate construction of the narcissistic personality was designed to paper over. They may not have language for it. They may not understand what they're experiencing. But they experience it. In the quiet you left behind, they experience it fully for perhaps the first time. Does this create change? Rarely. And that's the brutal truth. The experience of their own emptiness, while real and profound, is also terrifying enough that most narcissists move away from it as fast as they can. New supply. New activity. New narrative. The pain becomes a war story rather than a lesson. I went through a hard time after she left, rather than, I finally understood what I'd been doing. The experience touches them. It does not necessarily transform them. And that distinction matters enormously for you. Because the question of whether they changed is ultimately not your question to carry. Your question, the one that actually belongs to you, is whether you have changed. Whether the relationship and the work of leaving it, and the long hard road of no contact, and the therapy or the journaling or the long walks and the honest conversations with people who love you, whether all of it has moved you towards something better, something clearer, something more like the person you were before you lost yourself in trying to love someone who couldn't receive it. The consequence on your side that nobody celebrates loudly enough is the reclamation of your own perception. After months of no contact, something shifts in how you experience reality. The constant second-guessing that characterized your inner life with them, the maybe I'm wrong, the maybe I'm too sensitive, the maybe I'm imagining things, begins to quiet. Because the source of the gaslighting is gone. And in the absence of the voice that always told you your perceptions were wrong, your perceptions start to feel trustworthy again. That restoration is not small. It is enormous. There will be moments, unexpected, unwelcome, arriving in the middle of ordinary Tuesdays, when you feel something that confuses you. Something that might be grief, or longing, or a complicated tenderness for the person they were in the beginning, before you understood what the beginning was for. These moments are not signs that you made the wrong choice. They are signs that you are human. That you loved someone, however imperfectly you were loved in return. Let the moment pass. Let it pass without acting on it. And then return to the life you are building. The one that is yours. The consequence that matters most, on both sides of this equation, is this. The narcissist's strength was always contingent. Always borrowed. Always dependent on a supply that you provided and have now withdrawn. The thing that seemed so immovable is proving, in your absence, to be less solid than it appeared. And your strength, the strength you doubted, the strength they spent years making you question, is proving, in your presence with yourself, to be something real. Something self-generated. Something that does not require an audience to remain intact. That is the difference between you. And it has always been the difference. Here is the final truth. The narcissist's greatest strength was always the conviction that they could not be left. Not really. Not for good. That no matter what they did, the people who mattered would return. Because they always had. Because the bond was strong enough, or the manipulation was skilled enough, or the isolation was complete enough that leaving never quite stuck. You leaving, and staying gone, is not just the end of a relationship. It is the demolition of a foundational belief. And foundational beliefs, when they collapse, take something essential with them. What dies in the narcissist when you go no contact is not the person. People are more complex than our worst patterns. What dies is the invulnerability, the untouchable quality, the performance of needing nothing and no one. It dies because it was never real, and your sustained absence is simply the force that finally reveals that. Like pulling back a curtain to find not a wizard but a person. Frightened. Alone. Running a machine that no longer has power because the power source walked out. And here is what is born in you. Not immediately, not in the first weeks of no contact when everything feels raw and uncertain and the grief is indistinguishable from doubt. But over time, in the accumulation of days chosen for yourself, something is born that the relationship had been suppressing. A self that knows what it needs. A voice that trusts its own perceptions. A person who can sit in silence without filling it with someone else's chaos. Someone who is, for the first time in a long time, simply home. The healing is not the absence of scars. You will carry marks from this. Specific, recognizable marks, in the way you sometimes tense when someone raises their voice, in the way you sometimes over-explain yourself in new relationships, in the occasional midnight thought that maybe you were, after all, too much. These marks are real. They are also not the whole story. They are the record of something survived. And survival, when it is conscious and chosen and worked at, becomes strength that could not have been built any other way. The narcissist looked invincible. I know. For so long, they looked invincible. And you, doubting yourself, absorbing blame, shrinking to fit their requirements, may have believed, in your lowest moments, that you were the weak one, that they were the powerful one, that the dynamic reflected some fundamental truth about the relative worth of two people. It didn't. It reflected two things: their exceptional skill at extracting power from others, and your exceptional capacity for love. These are not equivalent. One is a deficit wearing a costume. The other is a genuine human gift. What you gave that relationship was real. Your love was real. Your patience was real. Your hope, however many times it was disappointed, however many times it was used against you, was real. None of that was wasted in the way that waste usually means wasted. It was misdirected, given to someone without the internal architecture to receive it properly. But the capacity that generated it, the depth, the care, the willingness to stay, that capacity is still yours. It goes with you into the next chapter, into a life that will be different because you now know, at a cellular level, what you will and will not accept. The narcissist will not tell you that your no contact reached them. They will not send you a message one day that says, "You were right to leave, and what you did by leaving finally made me see something true about myself." That message is not coming. Not because it isn't true that your leaving reached them, but because acknowledging that would require the very self-awareness their psychology was built to prevent. The impact is real. The acknowledgement is not coming. Make peace with that. It is, in a strange way, the final gift of understanding. You don't need their acknowledgement. You never needed it, though you wanted it reasonably, understandably, in the way all people who've been hurt want the person who hurt them to finally understand the weight of what they did. But your healing does not require their understanding. Your life does not require their endorsement. Your freedom is not contingent on their admission. You are free the moment you decide you are. And the decision happened the moment you chose silence over engagement. The moment you chose yourself. There are people who will come through what you've been through and build something extraordinary from the wreckage. Not despite the pain, because of it. Because pain, when it is survived consciously and processed honestly, deposits wisdom in places that comfortable lives never reach. You know things now. About yourself, about human psychology, about the difference between love and need, between strength and performance, between a relationship that builds you and one that slowly, methodically dismantles you. That knowledge is not nothing. It is a map. Use it. They seemed invincible, but you walked away. And that is the most powerful thing that has ever happened in this story.